Yo, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy channel. And in this video, I'm going to give you my top buy low and sell high candidates for week 11 of the 2021 fantasy football season. The Thursday night game between the Patriots and the Falcons has already happened, but we are still in week 11. I'm recording this before the Sunday games. So in this video, like I said, I'm going to try to uncover some potential league winning players to buy low on as we're getting closer and closer to the end of the season. I'm going to start with my favorite buy low candidates at this stage of the 2021 NFL season. And the first guy that I'm going to talk about is a running back who had a slow start to the year, has missed the last few games with injury, but will be making his return soon and has the potential to be maybe a league winner, at least make some noise down the stretch. And that's going to be Miles Sanders, running back of the Philadelphia Eagles. You can see he hasn't had the greatest start to the year. Week 1, he had 15 points. This is in half PPR. But then after that, really pretty much just single-digit mediocre performances. Nothing really good at all. Then he gets hurt. So there's a reason why I'm calling him a buy low. It's because I think his value is perceived to be a little lower than it actually is. So Miles Sanders is a talented running back. But as long as he's been in Philadelphia, and I don't expect this to change, he hasn't really had the opportunity to be a true workhorse running back. They just don't usually like to give him, 20 to 25 touches most games. You can even see his volume before he got hurt. He had a lot of single-digit carry games, which is not ideal, but the Eagles have been running the ball quite a bit, and he is going to be coming back in Week 11, so that is his only tough matchup that is remaining. If he does come back in Week 11 against the Saints, that is going to be a tough matchup. And since he's returning from injury, it's possible that they kind of ease him into the game plan and don't give him a ton of volume. So Miles Sanders is still a buy low for me right now, but he could also be a nice buy low candidate after week 11 if he doesn't have a good game. And I'm going to tell you why. So we kind of stated the negatives. He doesn't always see the most volume. And he hasn't had the greatest start to the year, but this is where I think things could trend upwards. Okay, so like I said, the Eagles are a run heavy team and they've been running the ball a lot lately. And after that week 11 matchup with the Saints, if you look at their schedule, it is really juicy, and I think that gives Sanders a chance to make a lot of noise down the stretch. They play the Giants, the Jets, have a bye week, and then in the playoffs, if you're doing 15, 16, 17 for your postseason, he gets Washington, the Giants again, and then Washington. So just taking a quick look at this Fantasy Pros schedule right here, if you look at those teams, the Jets are giving up the most points to running backs. The Giants are giving up the 5th most points to running backs in fantasy. The Washington football team, they're in the middle, not a bad matchup, but for sure the Washington football team, they are an exploitable matchup. And then was there another team? Giants? No, that's it. They got Giants, Jets, and then Washington. They are playing the Saints. Like I said, in week 11, if he comes back and plays against the Saints, that is a brutal matchup. And coming off of injury, I don't expect big things. Obviously, Miles Sanders has that big play ability, so he really just needs one big play to have a good game. But if he struggles in week 11, I think that he is still a nice buy low candidate. But if you can get him now for a good price, I would definitely recommend doing that. Obviously, don't overpay for him. I'm not saying that he's a locked-in running back 1. But I kind of like him. Like, if you can put him into your wide receiver 2, or not wide receiver, running back 2, or even your flex spot, I think that would be an awesome move for your team. Now, this next player on my buy low list is someone that I was kind of hesitant to put on the list, and I'm going to talk about why in a second. But first of all, I got to tell you who it is, right? And that's going to be Javonte Williams, running back of the Denver Broncos. So the reason I was hesitant to put this guy on the list is because his value is going to be very dependent on the manager in your league that has Javonte on their team. So there's kind of there's this thought process that Javonte Williams, the rookie running back, would eventually take over a majority of the work in the Denver backfield. He's currently kind of splitting snaps with Melvin Gordon there. And week 11, which is the week that we're in right now, a lot of offenses, if they're going to make big changes to their team, they will use the bye week to kind of as a transition period to make those changes. So some people are saying, maybe this is when the Denver Broncos make that shift to giving Javonte more of a workload over Melvin Gordon. In my opinion, Melvin Gordon has been good enough and the Broncos are still in the hunt enough to where I think it'll continue to be a pretty even split. But in this case, I'm saying Javonte Williams is a buy low if there is a manager in your league that doesn't see that potential upside if Javonte were to take over the lion's share of the backfield, or if Melvin Gordon were to get injured. I also think Javonte would become basically a league winner at that point. I think he would be awesome. But like I said, if the manager in your league is still clinging on to that hope that Javonte is going to be a running back one come the playoff time, then just, resend it. Don't send any trade. I mean, you can send a trade offer, but if they're asking for too much, don't do it. That's why it's called a buy low. But, if they're viewing Javonte as this like really unplayable running back that they don't really want on their team, is kind of boring, then I would see if maybe you could acquire Javonte, maybe even have a little trade package where you get Javonte as like an additional piece with another player that you're getting, kind of like an under the radar type of guy. Because if you look at his performances, he has had some usable games in there, even while splitting carries with Melvin Gordon. And if you look at the rest of his schedule, he has some nice matchups. He's got the Chargers, Detroit. The Chiefs defense is exploitable, but if you look at their points given up to running backs, it's kind of in the middle of the pack. The Bengals, the Raiders, and the Chargers. He has the Chargers twice, so that's probably his best matchup, that and Detroit. So, like I said, it really depends on the context of your league, but Javonte definitely has some big upside if he does somehow end up getting more work, and even if not, he still will have some value, especially in those exploitable matchups. And then, in an odd twist of events, I'm actually going to be talking about another Denver Broncos player, and that's going to be wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. So, let's talk about Jeudy here. He's played 4 games this year, right? Week 1, he was off to a hot start, and then he got injured in that game, left early, had double-digit points, even in limited time. He missed a ton of games. Oh, no, I guess not a ton of games. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 games, so that's a sizable part of the season. He comes back his first week, 4 for 39, and then 6 for 69, pretty nice. 6 for 48. So he hasn't done anything too crazy since his return. He's been injured, and now he gets his bye week. So there's a couple things here. I think Jerry Jeudy is a better player and a better fantasy player than what he has shown in his 3 games since returning from injury. He hasn't gotten in the end zone really. A lot of these game scripts weren't really close games. Against Dallas, they had a blowout win. Against the Eagles, they got blown out. You can make a case that maybe Jeudy should have done better, but I mean, he had 9 targets. That's pretty okay. And again, this is called a buy low for a reason. It all depends on the asking price. So, if someone views him as, a wide receiver 1, high wide receiver 2, then I would probably avoid that. But if someone views Jeudy as like a wide receiver 3 type of player, I think he has more upside than that. Especially after this bye week, a few weeks removed from injury, his targets are there. He just hasn't gotten in the end zone yet. I think the targets will continue to be there. And if he can score a little bit here and there, he will be a nice solid player to put, maybe in that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 spot, maybe your flex, something like that. But again, this all comes down to the value perception of Jerry Jeudy in your league. I know there are a lot of Jerry Jeudy truthers out there who still view him, very highly, and they won't really trade him for anything other than, his maximum potential. So in that case, probably just, avoid trading for him. But he's the type of player where maybe if you're making a trade, kind of like Javonte, if you're making a trade where Jeudy isn't the centerpiece, maybe you can somehow kind of slide Jerry Jeudy in there, like, okay, you give me Jeudy, I'll throw this in there. And then I think down the stretch, you'll be kind of surprised that, how solid Jeudy is going to be, especially in PPR leagues, because he's seeing solid targets. After that game where he was coming back from injury, 8 targets, 9 targets, that's pretty decent. So, I think he could just be a solid piece for your lineup. All right, and I'm going to talk about one more buy low candidate, and that is going to be Mike Gesicki, tight end of the Miami Dolphins. So he has had 2 gooses this year. I remember after week 1, everyone was panicking. Actually, I changed it to half PPR, but after week 1, a goose is a goose in all formats. But week 1, people were panicking, and a lot of people were cutting him because he saw 3 targets, caught 0 of them for 0 yards, had a goose. Week 2, not a good game. But then since then, he has been solid. 13.6, 14.2, a pretty mediocre game, 15.5, 18. So for a tight end that isn't like Travis Kelce, that is really, really good. You're getting multiple double-digit performances, like you're getting them quite often. That is awesome. And all tight ends, for the most part, other than Kelce, for pretty much, they do struggle with consistency. But when a player has a goose, it just hits different. It really just hurts your soul. So if the manager that has Gesicki in your league sees the goose and they are just freaking out, I would try to make a play to acquire Gesicki. Maybe they even cut him. If he's on your waiver wire and you need a tight end, I would add him and play him with confidence, especially this week against the Jets in Week 11. The Jets defense is horrible. And even in this goose against the Baltimore Ravens, I watched that game back. He had 7 targets in that game and caught 0 of them. That is completely fluky. He was really close to reeling in a few of those catches. And he is a really good and talented player. He's involved in the offense. So I think that was just a complete fluke. He's not going to be this, high tight end one, like this Waller, Kittle, Kelsey type of guy. But if you're talking about just solid players, and if you don't have one of those top tier guys, Gesicki is a nice player to have in your lineup. So if you're talking about kind of like that next tier of player, behind those big 3, behind Mark Andrews, which I think you could also include in that top group. If behind those guys, behind the Pitts, who else? Hawkinson, those type of guys. I think Gesicki is pretty close to once you get past those players, that's where you can start to think about sliding Gesicki in there. So coming off of the goose, I think this presents a great buy low opportunity for a great player. Now we're going to move on to my favorite sell high candidates, and I believe all of my candidates they're all running backs I'm going to talk about. I got 3 players to talk about. The first one is Antonio Gibson, running back for the Washington football team. So he had been dealing with some injuries before their bye week. You can see his volume kind of suffered a little bit there. For a guy that you drafted pretty high to be a workhorse, he saw some decent volume, double digits most games. He had a 20 carry game, a couple of those, but there were some games where the volume kind of got away from him, and his efficiency really wasn't the greatest in some of these games. And he wasn't really involved in the passing game because the Washington football team in passing situations often uses J.D. McKissic in those scenarios. But then they had their bye week in week 9, and he must have gotten a little healthier over that bye week because right away against Tampa Bay, a matchup that I'm sure a lot of people didn't start him in, depending on their options, just because of the tough matchup. He had 24 carries, which is nice to see, and that is a sign of optimism that the team was willing to give him 24 carries coming off of the bye week. He still didn't see the pass game involvement, but even with those 24 carries, I know it was a brutal matchup, but he made his week off of a 2 touchdown performance. So without those touchdowns, obviously I don't like to take touchdowns away from players, and he can score on any given week, but when you see a guy have 24 for 64, and he gets in the end zone twice, which elevates that performance to make it look a lot better than it really was for fantasy, and you're talking about a guy who isn't really involved in the passing game on a team that I expect to be down more often than not, having to pass the ball, right? So I think Antonio Gibson will lose some opportunity in those games when the Washington football team is losing because they'll have J.D. McKissic on the field more. And against Tampa Bay, if you guys weren't aware, the Washington football team was actually leading this game. It was just a really weird thing. They won the game against the defending or the Super Bowl champions of last year, the Tampa Bay Bucks and Tom Brady. It was just a weird game. So I think this was more of an outlier. I think Antonio Gibson will be solid for fantasy, especially in games when they're leading and the team can give him the volume. And it's nice to see that when they are winning, the team is actually willing to give him, 20 plus carries. That is awesome to see. But I just worry that they won't be leading that many games. And when they're not, he's not going to see that many targets. The most targets he's seen was week 1. He had 5. Since then, 2, 2, 2, he got a bunch of 2s. 3, 2, 3, 2. So that's my only worry, especially in PPR leagues. So again, this is called a sell high. So I'm not getting rid of him for, nothing, right? I'm not going to trade him away for some unusable, nothing. But if someone views him as a running back, like a really solid running back 1, like a high-end running back 1 even, then if you can get that kind of value, I would capitalize on that because even though he's coming off of a great game, I think this is a perfect time to sell high. My next sell high candidate is James Conner, running back of the Arizona Cardinals. And this is a sell high. I like James Conner. He's been great. I think he'll continue to be solid. But this is a sell high because I think he has reached his peak value. He's had, I think, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 rushing touchdowns plus a receiving touchdown. So 12 touchdowns on the year through 10 games. And in this Arizona Cardinals offense, he could continue to do that just because it's an elite offense. They're going to be scoring a lot. Chase Edmonds is on injured reserve right now with an ankle sprain. And even with Edmonds active, James Conner is their goal line running back. So he will continue to likely score touchdowns, but it's pretty rare that a player continues to just score touchdowns at this rate. So there is a chance that regresses a little bit to the mean, and a lot of his production is based on those touchdowns. With Chase Edmonds out, it does kind of secure his yardage a little bit more. Ironically, against the Panthers, he didn't have a great yardage game, but they were getting blown out. They couldn't really run the ball. Plus, Carolina has a great defense. So that was, that's kind of fluky. But yeah, this is a player that I think has reached peak value. He had that big, 37.8 point game against the 49ers. He kind of saved his week a little bit last week with a touchdown. And like I said, I think he will still have those games where maybe he doesn't have the most yardage, but he gets in the end zone 1 or 2 times, or maybe even 3 times, right? So I guess when I say James Conner is a sell high, I want to say that I like James Conner, but if there's someone in your league that views him as like a mid running back 1, because I even think you can make a case that, he's a really solid high running back 2 for the rest of the year, depending on, Chase Edmonds' injury and all that. But if you can get really good value for James Conner, I would definitely do that, because I think just based on his recent production and his touchdown scoring, I think you could turn that into maybe another elite running back plus something, or maybe you could give away James Conner and just trade him in for some really like awesome player that has a long history of being great for fantasy. And James Conner, let's not forget, he does have quite the extensive injury history, so we haven't seen that pop up yet, thankfully, but you never know. I don't like to say players are injury prone, but James Conner has shown in the past that he has struggled to stay healthy. So those are just a couple things to consider. Again, not a must sell high, but I have been kind of floating him out there in some trades, trying to see what sort of crazy value I can get. And my final sell high candidate is Devin Singletary, running back of the Buffalo Bills. And I'm not going to lie, you're probably not going to be able to trade Devin Singletary straight up for anything more than like a wide receiver 3, something like that. But in my opinion, he is a great player to include in a trade package. So maybe you're trying to acquire player A and you're offering player B, and in order to get player A, you need to add something to give away. Devin Singletary is the perfect person to add to that offer, because he's coming off of a couple of usable games for fantasy, 9.4 half PPR points and 11.4 half PPR points. But you have to notice, those games came against the Jacksonville Jaguars and the New York Jets. So looking at this little chart right here, Jacksonville is actually middle of the pack in terms of points given up to running backs. But if you look at the Jets, they are giving up the most. And so his good performances lately, or mediocre performances, are coming against some pretty good matchups, particularly with the Jets. And even with that being said, the Buffalo Bills are not a running football team. It's a pass-heavy pass-heavy football team with Josh Allen throwing the ball a lot, and he also is splitting carries with Zach Moss, and Matt Breida even got involved in this blowout win against the Jets. So even in a game that they won 45-17, he only saw 7 carries. He had 1 catch. He's just not seeing a ton of volume lately. So I would just take advantage of the fact that he was efficient with his volume lately. And like I said, a lot of people know that Singletary, they know these things about Singletary, but I think you can probably throw him into a package where you're like, okay, hey, this is a guy where if you're really thin at running back, I'll give him to you, and it's just a body that you can put in your lineup. But he's really not inspiring for fantasy at all, especially if you look at the rest of his matchup as well. You got the Colts here. I'll even show you these. His matchup is brutal. Colts. The Saints are right there. He gets the Colts and the Saints. Those are 2 of the worst matchups for running backs. Patriots, Buccaneers. We can look at that. Patriots. Why aren't they? Oh, I probably should spell it right, huh? Patriots. They're a pretty good defense as well. Who else was it? Patriots, Buccaneers, Panthers. Buccaneers are a good run. They're a great run defense. The Panthers, they are also giving up like no points to running backs. I guess in week 17, they get Atlanta, which that's obviously a good matchup. But, I mean, if you make it to the championship, you're likely not going to want to be relying on Devin Singletary. So, again, this is just a player that you can throw into a trade to kind of sweeten the deal, but probably not someone you're going to be able to get just straight up value for. But, again, a nice little trade piece to include in a trade package. All right, those are my top buy low and sell high candidates at this point in the middle of week 11 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys later. Peace out.